Good morning, FBC Woo. I bring you greetings from Houston, Texas on this morning. I'm so grateful for each and every single one of you. And I'm grateful that God allowed our paths to cross virtually on this morning. I'm also so grateful for my friend and colleague, your pastor, Pastor Brent. We've become so close in the last year through our journey at Boston University, as well as just outside of that, and just as colleagues to just talk about ministry together. So you have a wonderful, a phenomenal pastor. I'm sure you already know that. But I'm especially grateful for him and his leadership, his kindness, and his love for humanity. He also told me that he's been preaching homilies for the last few weeks. So I will go ahead and oblige to that. I will also be brief on this morning. I'm not a long-winded preacher anyway, but especially with everything we have going on, I think it's just great to just have just a small nugget, if I might give some encouragement on this morning. For the next few minutes, I'd like for you to center your minds and your hearts around the idea of Jesus, the history maker. So often in life, we go through events and experiences without actually being present for the moment at hand. We become so engrossed in the status quo that we forget to sometimes look up and take note of what's really going on. We get caught in the monotony of routine that we don't even consider that there may be newness being birthed all around us. We get distracted by so many things that don't really matter that we forget to give birth or give life to things that really do matter. In these moments of perceived business as usual, sometimes it requires a nudge to awakening to fully realize the magnitude of the moment we're in. In our text today, it was business as usual for all who were gathered at the synagogue. While we know that there were some present who were set on their own way of doing business, taking advantage of God's people, deceiving them and exploiting them, I also believe that there were some gathered there who, fatigued from hearing and seeing the same thing day after day, were ready for a change. They were ready for a monumental shift for which their souls were yearning. They were tired of hearing empty messages that left them bereft of hope for the possibility of something new. They were exhausted from leaving the synagogue day after day without a renewed zeal for living. They were fed up of hearing the same messages void of encouragement that would help them deal with the inequities of life. They were tired of feeling broken, overlooked, and disregarded. After all of the times they were experiencing disappointment, sadness, hopelessness, and frustration, the people were ready for something to move. They were ready for something to change. They were ready for a shift. The good news is that in their yearning, Jesus showed up. Just when they least expected to see change on the horizon and perhaps had even given up hope, Jesus' very presence signaled the ending of one reality and ushered in a new one along with all of its possibilities. And just in case that shift became lost in the predictability of life that they were used to, he made it clear that a shift was at hand, a shift in how they thought, what they believed to be true, how they lived, and what they even thought was possible. Jesus showed up to not only break the status quo, he showed up to shake the very core of this earth. The monotony of sameness can sometimes keep us blinded of the newness being birthed all around us. So Jesus boldly announced exactly what time it was. It was God's time. It was God's time to do everything that God promised to do to change the fabric of society. It was God's time to rescue the people from pain, from heartache, from desperation, from hopelessness. Regardless of what the circumstance might have looked like at the time, it was God's time to go to work. It was God's time to continue God's track record of always coming through. It was God's time to bring about undeniable, unavoidable, unfathomable change. In that moment there in the synagogue over 2,000 years ago, Jesus made it clear that a new era was beginning, one that couldn't be stopped or undermined. When Jesus uttered the words, "The Spirit is on me. God has chosen me to preach, pardon, recover, and free," Jesus dared to declare that it was time for a change, time for transformation. It was time to make history. Throughout his life as a servant, Jesus proved that it is possible to have a world that isn't consumed with getting instead of giving. It's possible to have a world that doesn't put the needs of a few over the needs of many. The meager carpenter who everyone underestimated defied the beliefs of his time and spoke life, liberty, justice, and love. Jesus didn't ask anyone for permission. He didn't worry about hurting anyone's ego. He didn't consume himself with stress about how he was going to fulfill the calling on his life. Instead, he embraced what he knew was deeply embedded in him. He embraced a love for humanity that refused to be blinded by greed or selfishness. Jesus chose to be fearless by doing what many perhaps couldn't even conceive as possible. Yes, people were amazed by his ability to heal, recover sight, and all of the miracles he performed. But what was really remarkable was the way that he changed hearts and minds of showing God's love, what true love is. He chose to care for all of God's children, regardless of how the world might have discarded them. Jesus decided not to allow someone's past, their mistakes, their shortcomings, stop them from having access to a new way of life. He chose love. Even when people relentlessly worked against him, his love for people withstood the attacks. Yes, we know that love is inconvenient. It's scary. It's uncontrollable. And it's all consuming. But that's the kind of love that Jesus dared to show each and every single one of us. My brothers and my sisters, I believe with my whole heart on this morning that this world is craving a shift. It's crying out for change. It's crying out for us to use our gifts and our voices to make history and dare to love one another so deeply that we cause a seismic shift on this earth. Every day that we wake up and we have breath, Jesus invites us to birth newness and birth life. We are invited to be torn away from our busyness and our routine-filled lives and pay attention to everything that's going on around us. There's a voice that's calling us to leave our places of comfort and make sacrifices to change the landscape of the world in which we live. If the greatest history maker that ever walked this earth was willing to sacrifice his life because of how much he loved this world and loved God's children, we can't help but to say yes to that same willingness to sacrifice whatever is necessary to heal, to shape, and to love this world to wholeness. We can't be discouraged by not knowing exactly what to do or how to do it. Jesus didn't have a guidebook. All he had was God's voice telling him that he was God's son, the love and the light of God's eyes. There were no prerequisites to Jesus being called to show this world a love that it had never seen before. He didn't need degrees. He didn't need to be a part of any organizations. He didn't need to be a member of any special families. He didn't need to hold office. He didn't need to have fame. He didn't need to have money or power. The only thing that Jesus needed was to say yes to a call to love this world. Now, all of these years later, his yes makes our yes possible. I want to encourage everyone today to dare to follow Jesus's lead. Dare to answer the call to make history. God is calling every single one of our names and inviting us to be a part of what God is doing in this very moment. The same God who told Jesus, "You are my son, marked by my love is the same God who still says today, you are my daughter and you are the pride of my life. You are my son and you are marked by my love. You see, we serve a God who is doing a new thing even now on this Sunday morning. We serve an awesome God who is inviting us to be a part of co-creation and to be a part of the newness of this earth. We serve a God whose love knows no limits or bounds. The God who was, who is, and who will always be is calling us to not only to believe, but to do. Hear the call to transform and shake the core of this earth. Receive God's cry to let love guide our hands and our feet on this earth and to be a part of the history that God is making. It won't be easy, and Jesus shows us that it never is. He was chastised, rejected, abused, and marginalized, but he kept on going. He kept on loving. He was misunderstood, mistreated, and mocked, but he kept on loving. He was beat and he was spit on, but he kept on loving. He kept on saying yes. He said yes to abundant, vulnerable, inconvenient, earth-shattering love. Yes to being a history maker, regardless of the sacrifice or the cost. There aren't many guarantees in this world, but one thing that we can be assured of is that God will be with us every single step of the way. We can be sure that Jesus, who leads us and loves us, will stand with us and remind us that change isn't easy, but the outcome is always worth it. Creating a world where all human beings have quality of life is worth it. Creating a world where we see the divinity in all of God's children is worth it. Birthing a world where there is no homelessness, there's no poverty, there's no brutality or inequity is worth it. The stage is set for us to make history. I close and leave you with this question. How will you choose to follow Jesus and make history? Amen.